Introduction. The $50 water filter that outlasts any $5,000 system. Why don't they sell it? Every month, the water bill arrives, and you pay it. Every few months, the plastic cartridge in your fridge slows to a trickle, and you replace it. Every few years, the membrane in your reverse osmosis system fails, and you pay a technician to replace that too. Somewhere in a tall glass office, an executive watches those numbers repeat like clockwork and smiles, because you are playing inside a system built on dependency. But imagine, just for a moment, stepping outside that system. Imagine a water filter that costs $50 to build, uses no electricity, wastes no water, and can operate for 30 years without a single replacement part. Imagine a filter that removes most harmful bacteria and parasites through a natural process. A filter so reliable that more than 2 million families around the world trust it every day for their survival. And yet, you've likely never seen it in a store. Not because it's a secret government experiment or a buried military invention, but because the modern water industry has billions of reasons to keep you buying cartridges, membranes, and subscription filters instead of learning about a design that almost never needs to be replaced. Welcome back to Historia Prime. Today we explore the hidden history, the living biology, and the economic incentives that keep the BioSand filter out of sight. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why this remarkable technology never made it into your hardware aisle, and how building one yourself could give you long-term water independence that no commercial system can match. Chapter 1. The River of Death. To understand why a $50 water filter is anything short of a miracle, we have to step back almost 2 centuries, to a time when one river was quietly, methodically killing an entire city. It is the year 1829. London stands as the proud heart of the British Empire, a booming metropolis of more than 1.5 million people. Yet beneath its power and wealth, something sinister is flowing. The River Thames, London's lifeline, is thick, brown, and suffocating under the waste of slaughterhouses, tanneries, and overflowing sewers that spill straight into the current. And from that very same river, water companies pump drinking water directly into the homes of ordinary families. The results are devastating. Waves of typhoid and dysentery sweep through the city. Cholera tears entire neighborhoods apart. At this moment in history, no one even understands the concept of germs. People blame the air, the smell, the miasma drifting up from the river. They are wrong about the mechanism, but terrifyingly right about the source. Into this nightmare steps a civil engineer named James Simpson. Working for the Chelsea Waterworks Company, Simpson faces a problem that seems impossible. How do you purify water so contaminated it is practically liquid death, and do it at a scale large enough to supply an entire city? His solution is so simple, so unglamorous, that it borders on insulting. Sand. Not chemicals, not steam engines, just carefully layered gravel and fine sand, arranged so the foul Thames water must slowly seep from top to bottom. And when it emerges at the bottom, something astonishing happens. It is clear. It is clean. Simpson completes his prototype in 1829, creating the world's first treated public water supply. But what he doesn't yet realize, and what history would later reveal, is that the sand is not merely filtering. Something biological is waking up inside that bed of grains, something alive, something quietly protective. Fast forward 25 years. It is 1854, and Dr. John Snow maps a horrifying cholera outbreak in Soho, 500 deaths in 10 days, before tracing it to a single contaminated pump on Broad Street. His famous removal of the pump handle becomes legend. Yet here is the part the textbooks barely whisper. The district supplied by the Chelsea Waterworks, the people drinking water that passed through Simpson's sandbeds, were largely spared. Long before germ theory had a name, before anyone understood what a pathogen was, slow sand filtration was already saving tens of thousands of lives. And that brings us to the first enormous question in our journey. If a simple bed of sand and gravel, built nearly 200 years ago, could protect a city from cholera and dysentery, then why, today, are you paying thousands of dollars for a complicated reverse osmosis system that demands constant replacements and electricity? Hold that thought, because the answer reveals far more about our modern world than it does about water. Chapter 2. The Calgary Epiphany. Now we move forward 160 years into the late 1980s, when the world had mastered slow sand filtration on a massive municipal scale, yet still had no way to bring that life-saving technology into an ordinary home. Traditional sand filters worked beautifully for cities with constant water flow, but the moment the water stopped, the biology inside the filter dried out and died. A system that could protect millions simply collapsed when scaled down to a village, a household, or a single child filling a bucket. And this is where a quiet, unassuming engineer steps into history. Dr. David Manns, born on a farm in the wide Canadian prairies, was not an ivory tower academic. He understood machines, soil, water, and the stubborn realities of life without infrastructure. In 1988, while studying water problems in rural South Africa, he saw communities battling diseases we now consider preventable. There were no pipes, no pumps, no electricity, no stores selling filters, and no money for cartridges, even if they were available. Chemical treatments required perpetual shipments of chemicals. Boiling water consumed precious firewood, stripping landscapes bare and filling homes with smoke. Commercial filters demanded replacement parts these families would never be able to buy. Every modern solution required a supply chain, and these communities had none. Manns realized the uncomfortable truth. The only system that could genuinely function in these environments was the same one that saved London in 1829. Slow sand filtration, alive, biological, self-sustaining. But he needed to perform a miracle. He needed to shrink an entire municipal plant into something the size of a household container. And even harder, he needed to make it work when the flow of water was not constant, but scattered throughout the day. In 1991, standing in his own kitchen in Calgary, he attempted what no one else had dared. His prototype cost exactly $60. A plastic garbage can, a bag of play sand, some gravel, a short piece of PVC pipe. It looked laughably simple, until he made one adjustment that would change the world. He raised the outlet pipe just a couple inches above the surface of the sand. That tiny geometric decision changed the destiny of water treatment. Because now, even when water wasn't being poured in, the filter could never drain completely. A shallow layer of standing water would always rest on top of the sand. And that thin 2-inch pool was everything. It kept the sand moist. It allowed oxygen to diffuse. It kept the biology inside, the very heart of the filtration process, alive and ready. With that single stroke of insight, Dr. Manns created the world's first household BioSand filter. He tested it in laboratories. He tested it in hospitals. He tested it in the rural villages of Nicaragua and the highlands of Chile. It worked again and again with a consistency that modern filters, filled with electronics and proprietary parts, struggle to match. And then, in a move almost unthinkable in today's economic landscape, he opened the patent for humanitarian use. He refused to lock survival behind a price tag. But the true miracle of this invention is not the bucket, nor the pipe, nor the sand itself. To understand why this $50 device outperforms systems costing thousands, we need to look not at the container, but at the living organism forming inside it. Because the real power of the BioSand filter comes from the monster in the sand. Chapter 3. The Monster in the Sand. When you buy a commercial water filter today, you're really buying a passive barrier, a reverse osmosis membrane, a carbon cartridge. They simply sit there, catching particles and contaminants until the pores clog and the system suffocates. They decline with every sip. They decay with every gallon. But a BioSand filter is nothing like that. It is not a device. It is not a membrane. It is not even, in the traditional sense, a filter. It is alive. The moment you pour river water, creek water, or contaminated well water into a brand new BioSand filter, something remarkable begins. Natural microorganisms from that water settle onto the very top layer of fine sand. Over the next 2 to 4 weeks, they multiply and weave themselves into a dense biological community. German scientists gave this layer a name, the Schmutzdecke, literally the dirty layer. Yet calling it dirty is almost laughable, because the Schmutzdecke is not filth, it is an army. A microscopic front line made of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and tiny predators like rotifers. They cling to the sand in a sticky, living film. And when contaminated water enters from above, the pathogens within it, cholera bacteria, typhoid organisms, diarrheal agents, are forced to pass straight through this gauntlet of hungry assassins. The predators don't merely trap pathogens, they don't politely slow them down. They devour them, and whatever survives this first onslaught descends into 50 centimeters of fine sand, packed so tightly that larger parasites like Giardia and Cryptosporidium get physically trapped in the labyrinth. Meanwhile, natural electrical charges on the sand grains pull dissolved contaminants toward them through adsorption. And deeper still, the environment becomes starved of oxygen and nutrients. Harmful bacteria simply cannot endure. They die off, fade out, disappear. By the time the water reaches the gravel at the bottom and gently flows out of the spout, it has passed through a living purification process more elegant than any manufactured system. Laboratory tests confirm what millions of families around the world already know. Once the Schmutzdecke matures, a simple $50 BioSand filter removes the vast majority of harmful bacteria. It eliminates parasites like Giardia entirely. It reduces iron and manganese that stain sinks and destroy appliances. And perhaps the most astonishing part is what happens over time. A carbon filter weakens the longer you use it. A membrane declines with every drop. But a BioSand filter grows stronger. The biological layer becomes more capable, more active, more protective. There are no cartridges to replace, no electricity to pay for, no wastewater to flush down the drain. And when, after months of service, the flow slows a little, you don't throw anything out. You simply swirl the top layer gently with your hand, scoop away the loosened debris, and the filter restores itself, alive, awake, and ready again. Day after day, year after year, for 3 decades. All powered by sand, gravity, and biology. A system so deceptively simple that the modern world forgot it, and so powerful that it refuses to die. Chapter 4. The Razor and Blade Paradox. So now we arrive at the question that has been simmering beneath every chapter so far. If a BioSand filter costs $50 to build, requires no replacement parts, uses no electricity, produces no wastewater, and lasts for an entire generation, then why has nobody ever tried to sell you one? Why is it that the World Health Organization praises it, that NGOs have helped construct more than 2 million of them across 70 countries, yet you can walk into any Home Depot or hardware store in America or Europe and never see a single one sitting on the shelf? The answer is not mysterious, and it is not hidden. It is written into the basic economics of the world we live in, because the modern residential water purification market is enormous, projected to exceed $10 billion in the United States alone within the next few years. And that wealth is not built on selling you one durable, permanent solution. It is built on something far more predictable, the razor and blade model. Companies sell you the razor, the plastic housing, or the under-sink unit at a digestible price. But the real profit comes from the blades, the replacement cartridges and proprietary membranes you must buy again and again. The initial unit might earn a modest margin, but the replacement filters, those often carry profit margins approaching 70%. You become a customer, not once, but repeatedly, predictably, forever. Now shift perspectives. Imagine you are a venture capitalist evaluating the BioSand filter. Its filter media is sand and gravel, materials anyone can collect locally. It has no moving parts. It uses no electricity. It never needs a cartridge or a membrane or a branded upgrade. If a company sold you one BioSand filter today, they would earn their profit once, and then never see you again for 3 decades. In today's economic landscape, a product that lasts too long is not an asset, it is a liability. Longevity becomes the enemy of revenue. A filter that actually solves a problem permanently is, in financial terms, a dead end. Now compare this to the crown jewel of modern home filtration, the reverse osmosis system. RO forces water through a microscopic membrane at high pressure. Yes, it removes heavy metals and certain chemicals exceptionally well, but every advantage it offers arrives with a price. A whole house RO system can cost thousands to install. It uses electricity to drive pumps. It burns through pre-filters, carbon stages and membranes that must be replaced every 6 to 24 months. And then there is the environmental cost. To produce a single gallon of purified water, an RO system may discard 3 or 4 gallons straight into the drain. In drought-prone regions, that is not just waste, it is a tragedy. Meanwhile, the BioSand filter wastes nothing at all. And even if a corporation wanted to mass market it, they would run into a physical reality the system cannot escape. A concrete BioSand filter weighs over 350 pounds. Modern logistics, from Amazon to global freight networks, are built around lightweight, plastic, high-margin products. Shipping a concrete unit to your doorstep would cost more than the filter itself. Then there is regulation. In the United States and Europe, water filters must pass expensive certifications like NSF and ANSI. These processes cost tens of thousands of dollars per model. You cannot certify sand pulled from a local riverbank. You cannot barcode a biological ecosystem that grows naturally in your own backyard. The regulatory world was built for manufactured products, not for a living filter that improves with age. And so we come to the truth. The BioSand filter cannot be neatly packaged. It cannot be optimized for quarterly earnings. It cannot be turned into a subscription model. It lives outside the industrial and commercial framework we have built. It is, in every sense of the word, uncommodifiable. And that is precisely why it has survived, and precisely why you were never meant to hear about it. Chapter 5. The Ceramic Silver Bullet. But what happens when you don't have 4 weeks to wait for a biological layer to bloom into life? What if disaster strikes tomorrow morning and your tap water turns brown, or your well is compromised, or the grid goes down and you need clean, drinkable water right now? History has an answer for that too, an answer so simple, so ancient, and so effective that it almost feels like a secret hiding in plain sight. It's called the ceramic pot filter. If the BioSand filter is your long-term, heavy-duty fortress of water security, then the ceramic pot filter is your rapid deployment tactical unit. It is the tool you reach for when time is short and the stakes are high. The technology behind it is not modern. It is not patented. It is not proprietary. It is, in fact, nearly 10,000 years old. You begin with clay from the earth. You mix it with something that burns away. Sawdust, rice husks, even spent coffee grounds. You press the mixture into the shape of a shallow pot, and you fire it in a kiln at 900 degrees Celsius. During firing, the combustible material disappears completely. What remains is a porous ceramic matrix, riddled with millions of microscopic holes. These pores are so astonishingly tiny often between zero point 0.2 and zero point 0.5 microns, that bacteria and parasites physically cannot pass through them. The pot becomes a microscopic maze that pathogens cannot escape, and then comes the brilliant marriage of ancient craftsmanship and modern science. Once the pot cools, it is painted with a thin layer of colloidal silver, nature's oldest antimicrobial weapon. The Greeks used silver to store water. The Romans carried it on their campaigns. Even today, silver is used in medical equipment and wound dressings because it disrupts the metabolism of microbes and shuts them down on contact. So when contaminated water enters the ceramic pot, the pathogens hit a double barrier. First, the pores trap them. Then the silver ions disable them. What drips into the clean reservoir below is safe, ready to drink water. The design is beautifully simple. You place the clay pot inside a standard plastic bucket with a spigot at the bottom. You pour dirty water in. The filter doesn't rush, it doesn't roar. It simply breathes the water through its walls, letting purified droplets fall like rain into the container below. It removes the overwhelming majority of harmful bacteria. It has no moving parts. It needs no electricity, and it costs between $8 and $15 to make. That's it. Dirt, fire, and a touch of silver. Organizations like Potters for Peace have trained local artisans in more than 50 countries to craft these filters from the soil beneath their feet. No factory, no assembly line, no supply chain, just hands, clay, knowledge, and time. And just like the BioSand filter, the ceramic pot filter commits a kind of economic sin in the eyes of big retailers. It lasts too long. It requires no cartridges. It demands no subscription. It creates independence instead of dependence, which is exactly why it thrives in villages, disaster zones, and remote communities, and why you will almost never find one sitting on a shelf at a big box store. It gives you clean water without giving anyone else recurring revenue. And that, in our modern world, is the one feature that guarantees it will never be promoted, even though it works. Chapter 6. Ultimate Water Independence. So how does all of this, history, biology, economics, apply to you, right now, living in a world that feels modern and secure? The truth is that our trust in tap water is one of the greatest illusions of our time. We assume that when we turn the faucet, safe water will appear. Yet across the world, aging water mains installed half a century ago are rupturing. Chemical spills seep into rivers. Storms overwhelm treatment plants, and grid failures can shut entire systems down without warning. So imagine this. It's an ordinary Tuesday morning. You're making coffee when your phone buzzes with an alert from your local utility. A major line has burst, bacteria have entered the city's water supply, and a boil water notice is now in effect. You rush to the grocery store, but the bottled water aisle is already stripped bare. Panic is settling in, not because the danger is immediate, but because the infrastructure everyone depends on has failed overnight. Your neighbors go home and begin the exhausting ritual of boiling pot after pot of water. They wait for the rolling boil, then wait again for it to cool. They pour it into pitchers, only to repeat the process an hour later. It drains their time, their propane, and their sanity. By the third day, frustration has turned into desperation, and when the utility quietly updates the timeline from 3 days to 3 weeks, the anxiety becomes palpable. But you? You don't join the panic, because sitting quietly in your garage or tucked behind your house is a 3-foot-tall concrete cylinder you built a year ago. You downloaded the free construction guide from CAWST, the Center for Affordable Water and Sanitation Technology. You spent a single afternoon mixing Portland cement, layering washed sand and crushed gravel, assembling a device so simple it felt unbelievable. You ran water through it from time to time, just enough to keep its living biology thriving. And now, when your neighborhood is unraveling, You walk calmly to the creek near your property. Or maybe you collect the rainwater pouring off your roof. Either way, you fill a bucket and bring it to your filter. You lift the lid, pour the water over the diffuser plate, and let gravity take over. The water spreads evenly. It settles into the Schmutzdecker, the living shield of microorganisms waiting at the surface. In seconds, they begin their invisible work. Predators consuming pathogens with the same efficiency that once protected an entire city from cholera. The water moves downward, passing through fine sand that traps parasites, removes iron, and silences contaminants. Step by step, the process becomes calmer, purer, safer. And 20 minutes later, from the small PVC spout near the base, clean water flows into your container. Not maybe clean, not clean if you're lucky, but biologically purified through the exact same mechanism that saved London in 1829. Refined, tested, and trusted in more than 2 million homes across 70 countries. You drink it not out of desperation, but out of confidence, because you understand the science, you understand the resilience, and you understand that what you built is not merely a filter, it is a safeguard against a fragile world. In that moment, you have achieved something that modern infrastructure can rarely promise: true independence. Conclusion: the legacy of sand. History is filled with miracles we were never taught to see. We've been trained to believe that progress must be complicated, expensive, and wrapped in plastic, that real solutions must come with microchips, maintenance fees, and a lifetime of replacement parts. And yet, the story of the BioSand Filter quietly dismantles that idea. For decades, the water industry has framed clean drinking water as a product you must continually purchase, not a natural process you can build and sustain yourself. They've built an empire on dependency. But this $50 system shows the opposite is true. It proves that you can create reliable, life-saving infrastructure without electricity, without cartridges, and without ever entering a store. All it takes is sand, gravel, concrete, and a shift in mindset. Instead of asking what device to buy next, you begin asking what process you can build once and trust for years. A simple filter made in an afternoon can outlast the appliances in your kitchen. It can serve your children, and maybe even their children, long after you're gone. This knowledge was never lost. It was simply never sold to you. Now that you see it, the question becomes yours alone. Will you stay tied to a fragile grid and an endless cycle of replacements? Or will you take a single afternoon to build something that could serve your family for decades? Let me know in the comments. Would you ever build a sand filter yourself? Do you trust nature's biology more than a plastic membrane? If you found this journey valuable, tap the like button, subscribe to Historia Prime, and ring the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Until then, stay curious, stay prepared, and remember, sometimes the greatest innovations are already beneath your feet. This is Historia Prime, signing off.